The glue on my fingertips had already gone tacky from the cold workshop air, and the iron table smelled like wet paper, rust, and old cabbage by the time I understood one simple thing. In a place like this, a man survives by looking smaller than the room expects. I kept my shoulders rounded, kept my voice soft, and made myself stammer on purpose when the foreman asked my name. That was the face I gave them on day one, a harmless bookbinder, a nobody with shaking hands. But I was a nobody. I was the decorated counter-smuggling officer they framed for my informant's murder, and I had been dropped into a maximum security block that the syndicate quietly ran like private property. Concrete walls, steel doors, chlorine on the mop water, oil under the machines, and men who learned to smile without warmth. They had caged me so deep that the world outside might as well have been another planet. My kid brother, Yannick, was somewhere in that same block, and that was the only reason I kept my mouth shut when they cut my laces off and handed me a gray uniform that still smelled faintly of bleach. The workshop was where they thought broken men would disappear into the noise. 6 long tables, 2 presses, 1 window with bars so old the paint had bubbled around the hinges. I got paper covers, thread, glue pots, torn legal books, prison forms, and the kind of tired orders nobody bothered repeating twice. So I listened instead. I listened to the clink of cigarettes being passed under the table, to the extra soup being promised for certain cells, to the way one boss always got his envelopes before the others. By the 3rd day, I could tell which of the cell bosses paid tribute in food, which one paid in favors, and which one paid in fear. The Warden's skim was there too, hidden in the numbers if you knew how to read them. 7 cartons marked as lost, 3 parcels signed twice, 1 supply line that always went missing before lockup. I kept all of it in my head. Exact amounts, exact hands, exact times. And on the 9th afternoon, when the quartermaster came to the binding table with a stack of cracked ledgers under his arm, I saw the scar before I saw his face, a pale slash under the jaw, a crooked thumb. The same man who had been standing behind the freezer door the night my informant died. The same walk, the same heavy pause before he spoke. He had not just killed my informant. He had done it with the calm of a man emptying a bin. My stomach went cold enough to hurt. I nearly said something, nearly stepped wrong, nearly let the old anger rise up and ruin everything. But I swallowed it down and bent over the paper like a good little bookbinder, fingers clumsy, eyes down, voice thin. That was the trick, because they needed to believe I was. If they thought I was only a stuttering inmate with glue on his cuffs, they would keep talking around me. And if they kept talking, they would keep giving me what I needed. The first real opening came that night, when I found the contraband phone tucked inside a hollow seam of a supply cart, wrapped in plastic and paper dust. 1 call would do it, 1 clean leak to the syndicate bosses on the outside. If the warden was stealing from them, they would turn on him before sunrise. If the cell bosses thought the warden had started skimming their cut, they would start hunting their own shadows. I didn't need a knife for that. I just needed the right pressure point. I sat on my bunk after lights out, listening to the pipes knock in the wall, and made the first entry in my head. Warden. Quartermaster. 2 cell bosses. 1 brother in danger. Then I opened the last ledger from the workshop cart, and there it was. Yannick's name, circled 3 times in red under a transfer note that should never have reached that page. If this story pulls you in, subscribe and leave a like, because that was the first time I understood they weren't just holding my brother, they were already moving him. The next morning, I went back to the workshop with glue on my cuffs, and Yannick's name still burning in my head. That is the trouble with prison work. It looks dull from the outside, but every dull thing has a seam, a loose board, a bad lock, a man who talks too much because he thinks nobody important is listening. I kept my head down, sat at the binding table, and let the foreman see the same weak hands he'd seen yesterday. The room had its own rhythm, metal trays scraping, a press groaning in the corner, rain tapping the high window in little gray clicks. The air was thick with paper dust and damp cardboard, and I could smell the old glue before I even opened the pot. Around me, the block was already moving money without ever saying the word. One cell boss sent a man for tea. Another got 2 extra envelopes in the stitching cart. A third had his washing bag returned heavier than it left. I didn't need a notebook. I had a memory built for routes, drop points, and crooked exchanges. By noon, I knew the shape of the hierarchy better than the guards did. The loud ones were not the ones in charge. The real power sat quieter, higher, always with a reason to be somewhere else. One man controlled the kitchen line. One controlled the laundry. One controlled the bodies moving between blocks. Every favor passed upward. Every fear passed downward. And above all of it sat the warden's skim ledger, hidden under supply counts and repair claims, feeding the whole thing like fat through a hose. The quartermaster came in just after lunch with a packet of cracked spines and a face I had been waiting to see. He didn't look at me long. He didn't need to. Men like him never remember the face of a person they expect to die. They remember the weight of the room, the temperature, the sound of the last breath. And that was enough. He dropped the packet on my table, and I caught the smell of wet wool, cheap tobacco, and that same cold bite of disinfectant that had been on the freezer handle when my informant died. I kept stitching the pages. Inside one of the books was a slip of paper no bigger than a matchbook. Just a room number, a time, and a single word. Collection. That was all I needed. The quartermaster was moving tribute for the block, and he was doing it on the warden's clock. So I started looking for the phone, not in the obvious places, not in the vents or under the bunks where desperate men hide cheap sins. I watched who carried laundry, who had 5 extra minutes near the tool cage, who got sent out of the workshop right before the evening count. On the 3rd day, I saw a guard with chipped teeth slip a wrapped bundle into a broken radio housing behind the storeroom. He touched it like it was hot. That made me look twice. The bundle was a contraband phone, old and scratched, the kind that never appears unless someone upstairs wants it there. I only got a glimpse before the guard locked the housing back up, but it was enough. The route existed. The outside could be reached. That meant the block's secrets were not trapped inside it, just waiting for the right hands. And then there was the buried name. Janek's file had been moved twice already, which meant they were adjusting him around the pressure in the block. Managed. I saw the transfer mark on a clipboard, then saw the same initials on the warden's skim ledger when the foreman turned his back. The shape of it made my skin go tight. My brother was not just a hostage. He was part of the accounting. I spent the rest of the shift binding pages and watching the quartermaster's reflection in the window glass. He left before dusk, and 2 minutes later, a runner came for the warden's office with the same packet number I had seen on the ledger. That was the moment it clicked. The warden wasn't simply taking a cut. He was using the block like a private market, and the quartermaster was the man who made the dirt move. I kept stitching. I kept breathing. I kept looking harmless. But by lights out, I knew exactly where the first leak had to go, and whose hands would start shaking when it got there. By the next count, I had already decided the first leak would not go through the workshop boys. They talked too much when they were tired, and tired men in a prison block sold scraps for cigarettes without even noticing they were doing it. So I kept my mouth shut, bent over the binding table, and let the room think I was only counting stitches and breathing through the glue smell. The place had a rhythm once you listened hard enough. 3 carts rolling past the door, 1 guard coughing on the landing, the press in the corner kicking every 40 seconds like a bad heart, damp cardboard, cold metal, chlorine from the mop bucket in the hall. I watched all of it and kept my face soft. The scarred quartermaster came through again just before noon, and this time I noticed the way the men near the wall straightened their backs when he passed. Not fear exactly. Habit. That is worse. Habit means the order has been there a long time. He dropped off a stack of spine covers and paused long enough for me to see the edge of the paper in his breast pocket. A transfer slip. Janik's block number was written on it. No explanation, no signature I could use, just the kind of paper that moves a person when nobody wants to admit they moved him. I kept stitching and felt my jaw tighten so hard it hurt behind the ear. That decorated counter-smuggling officer, framed for his informant's murder, is buried inside a maximum security block the syndicate quietly controls. Playing the broken newcomer, he maps the cell boss hierarchy and the bought warden to engineer a reckoning that frees his caged kid brother. I repeated that in my head the way other men repeat a prayer, because it reminded me that every number in this place had a hand attached to it. After dinner, when the corridor noise thinned and the guards started their lazy second round, I went back to the storeroom. The radio housing was still there behind the shelves, cracked at the corner, dust packed around the screws. I waited for the footsteps to pass, then pulled the housing open with the back of my nail. The contraband phone was wrapped in yellow tape and smelled like old plastic and battery acid. Cheap, scratched, no charger in sight. But it lived. I did not use it right away. I took a minute just to watch the door, listen to the pipe knock, count the seconds between one boot step and the next. Then I powered it on under my jacket and stared at the screen until my eyes adjusted to that weak blue light. 6 stored numbers. 2 had no labels. 1 had a single letter. The one I needed was marked only with a black dot. The message had to be small. Big messages get people killed. I typed the warden's skim in fragments, not the whole thing, just enough to make the outside understand where their money had gone. 4 missing cartons from the medical supply order. 2 extra deliveries to cell 3. 1 false repair charge. A weekend entry in the warden's hand that did not match the schedule. If the bosses outside believed the warden was feeding from them, they would turn on him faster than any inmate could. I sent it, then sat still with the phone hot in my palm. Nothing happened for a long second. Then the screen went dark, came back, and stayed on a blank incoming line. No caller name, just a number. My mouth went dry. If it was the wrong man, I was done. If it was the right one, then the whole block had just become smaller than my hand. The quartermaster shouted from the hall before I could answer. "Binder, you on your feet?" I shut the phone off and slid it back into the radio housing, but my fingers were shaking now, just a little. The quartermaster's voice had that flat edge men get when they already know something has shifted and they are trying to pretend it hasn't. Through the cracked door, I heard him stop near the warden's office, heard a second voice lower than his, and then the sharp slap of a file folder hitting metal. When I reached for the housing again, the screen was already lighting up, and this time, the dot had turned into a name. I held the contraband phone under my palm until the screen stopped flaring and settled into that dull blue glow. On the other side of the office wall, somebody dropped a folder onto metal, and the sound came through the corridor like a warning shot without the gun. I waited for the footsteps to move away before I looked again. The name on the screen was not a guard's, not the warden's either. It was a private number, saved under a first name only, the kind men use when they think secrecy makes them safe. I didn't answer right away. First I listened to the pipes, the distant clang from the yard gate, the low hum of the fluorescent strip above the hall. Then I typed back one word, received. That was enough to make my hand steady, because now I knew the leak had gone where I wanted it to go. The outside had picked it up. Someone beyond these concrete walls had read the first cut of the skim ledger and understood exactly what it meant. If the warden was skimming from the syndicate's share, the answer would not be polite. It would be fast and ugly and probably hidden behind a few clean signatures. From the office wall came another sound, this one softer, the scrape of a chair. Then a voice I couldn't hear clearly, only the shape of it through the plaster. Short sentences, no room to argue. The quartermaster was still there, and that meant the first crack had already reached the right room. I slipped the phone back into the radio housing, but I didn't close it all the way. The little thing had become a live wire, and I wanted it ready. Then I went back out to the workshop, because in a place like this, you can't look like a man waiting for news. Waiting makes you visible. Visible gets you searched. The shift had thinned out. One binder at the far table, 2 men on the presses, a guard with a cold face and coffee breath leaning near the door. I kept my head bent over a torn law volume and watched the quartermaster through the cracked reflection in the storage glass. He had a file in his hand now, the same one he'd slapped against metal earlier. He opened it once, shut it, then turned toward the warden's office with that tight, careful walk men get when they already know they've lost control of something. That was the first real change in the block. Just hesitation, and hesitation in a prison is blood in the water. By evening count, the gossip had already started moving. The kitchen men said one of the outside phones had lit up and stayed lit. The laundry crew said somebody from above had asked about missing inventory from 2 months back. The old inmate on the end bunk muttered that a man never gets rich in a place like this unless someone else is paying the bills. He said it like a joke, but he kept looking at the warden's wing after he said it. I stayed quiet, kept my hands on the thread, kept my eyes on the seam of the book, but inside I was tracking the whole thing. The quartermaster had been seen near the office. The warden had locked his door early. One of the cell bosses had skipped supper and sent for a runner instead. The place had begun to lean. Not enough for anyone weak to notice, enough for me. A few minutes before lights out, a scrap of paper came down the line with the evening tea. It was folded so small it could have been swallowed. No name, just a number and a time. After final lock, tool cage, south wall. I stared at it for 1 second too long. That was how traps worked here. They were never announced. They arrived looking like a favor. I burned the scrap under the heater tray and watched it curl black at the edges. The smoke smelled sharp, like scorched glue. Then I sat back on the bunk, heard the first key ring of the night, and understood that someone on the outside had already made their move, and somebody inside the block was now inviting me to the next one. I did not move for a full breath after the screen lit up. In a place like this, even a tiny delay can save your skin. The phone buzzed once against my palm, soft as a fly trapped in paper, and I let the noise from the corridor cover the sound of my thumb sliding over the answer key. The voice on the other end was low and careful. Not a guard, not a prisoner. Somebody who had learned to speak like a man standing near an open door. "Paper's dry," I said first. That was the line I had agreed with myself on, just in case the message was real. A pause, then, "Good. Keep the phone warm. The warden's already bleeding upstairs." I stared at the cracked wall while he talked. The concrete had a wet stain shaped like a thumbprint, and the strip light above the office door flickered in a slow, sick rhythm. Outside, boots crossed the hall. Somewhere farther off, a metal tray hit the floor, and nobody bothered to pick it up. I could hear all of it at once, and still hear the voice in my ear. He told me the skim ledger had reached the right people. Just enough. The part that mattered. A private cut on medical stock, false repair charges, and a delivery chain that should never have had the warden's initials on it. He didn't sound pleased. He sounded like a man watching a knife he had thrown come back through the dark. "Leave the phone where you found it," he said. "South wall after final count. No mistakes." Then the line went dead. I stood there a second longer, my hands still hot around the shell of the phone. Then I walked back to the workshop as if none of it had happened. Glue smell, wet thread, paper dust. Same room, different air. The kind of change only men like me notice. The old volume I had been binding sat open on my table, and I turned a page with the edge of my thumb. That was when I saw it again. The buried name, tucked under a false repair code and 3 lines of clean accounting. Larkin. Not a prisoner, not a guard. A name that belonged to one of the outside men, one of the people who never set foot in the block but owned the hunger inside it. That was new. That was useful. I copied the line into my head, then pulled the page free and slipped it into the hollow spine of the law book before anyone could pass behind me. My fingers were steady now, but my pulse had gone hard. The quartermaster was only part of this. The warden was only part of this. The real spine of the thing ran through names like Larkin, men who never touched a door handle and still decided who ate, who bled, and who disappeared. By the time evening count started, the block had changed again. Not much, just enough. The guard at the end of the hall was talking into his radio with his back turned. The laundryman near the sink avoided looking at the office wing. And the quartermaster, who had always walked like he owned the corridor, now moved with one shoulder higher than the other, as if he expected a hand to drop on him from above. I made my way to the south wall after count, carrying a bucket so nobody would ask what I was doing there. The stone there was colder than the rest, damp at the joints, with old rust marks under the pipe cover. I crouched long enough to check the loose grout, slipped the phone into the gap, and covered it with my thumb until the dust held. Then I waited. For a long second, nothing happened. No alarm, no footsteps, just the distant hiss of a pipe and the low mutter of men settling into lockup. Then a shape moved at the far end of the corridor, half hidden by the turn, and a note slid under the edge of the door to the utility room. I didn't reach for it right away. I watched the hall first. Only when the boots had passed did I bend down and pick it up. One line, written in block letters. They know you answered. I read it twice before the cold finally got through my hand. And then, from the direction of the warden's office, I heard the phone ring. Janek. I kept my head down and went on stitching while that phone rang in the warden's office. The sound was thin, ugly, and too loud for a room full of men pretending not to hear it. One ring, then a pause, then 2 more. The kind of call that does not bring good news. The kind that makes a man wipe his palms on his trousers before he even lifts the receiver. The foreman at the next table looked over once, then away. Nobody wanted to be the first to admit the block had changed shape. The air carried bleach from the corridor mop, old glue from my pot, and a trace of sweat from the open office door. I could hear someone talking low inside there. The warden's voice tight and clipped, like he was trying to keep his own teeth from chattering. Then the door swung wider. A guard came out fast, almost trotting, with a folded paper in his hand. He never looked left or right. He went straight for the stairwell. That was enough for me. Something had reached the office, and it had reached it hard. The quartermaster came back in while the guard was still on the landing, walking like he was already measuring where to stand if the floor gave way. He dropped a bound file on my table and told me, without looking at me, to repair the spine before shift end. His voice had gone dry. That was new. Men like him only sound dry when somebody higher up has started asking questions. I opened the file just enough to work the binding crack, and that was when I saw the shift mark inside. Janek's transfer had been moved forward again. 12 hours, maybe less. A fresh note had been stapled over the old one, and the old one had been crossed out with a hard black slash that went right through the warden's initials. Not erased, overruled. I let the pages fall shut before anyone could see my face change. That was the first time I understood the outside wasn't just pressure, it was a hand closing. Somebody named Larkin had put the block under a microscope, and now every rotten bit inside it was squirming. The warden was no longer only scared of being exposed, he was scared of being replaced by the men who paid him to stay invisible. That is a different kind of fear, cleaner, meaner. By the time the evening count came, the corridor was full of little shifts. The laundry runner was missing. One of the kitchen men had been pulled into the office wing and not returned. A guard stood by the south wall where the paper had told me to go. only now his radio was on, and his eyes were too sharp. I didn't move toward him. I kept to the line like a good inmate, and let the count pass. Then my pocket buzzed once. The contraband phone. I waited until the guards looked away, then slipped into the shadow beside the tool cage and opened the message with my thumb. No number, no greeting. Not the south wall. Utility sink. Now. I looked up slow. The utility room was across the corridor, half hidden by the iron rack and the old cleaning cart. If this was a trap, it was a neat one. If it was a warning, it was coming from the same line that had just told me they knew I answered. Either way, I had maybe a minute. So I went. The room smelled of damp rags and hot pipes. A single bulb buzzed over the sink basin, making the chrome shine sickly white. Nobody was inside. No guard, no quartermaster. Just a folded slip tucked under the soap tray, placed there with care. I touched it and felt the paper tremble from my own hand before I even lifted it. It was not for me. It was Johnny's cell number, rewritten in red pencil, and beneath it one word: isolating. I stood there with the paper open in my fingers and heard the corridor door slam behind me. A heavy key turned, then another. When I looked up, the utility room light was still buzzing, but the hall outside had gone suddenly, horribly quiet. Johnny. The silence outside the utility room lasted only a few seconds, but in a block like this, that can feel longer than an hour. I stood with the paper still open in my hand, listening to the air through the vent, listening for boots, for a cough, for anything that meant I had been brought here on purpose. No one came. That was almost worse. I folded the note once, then again, and slipped it under my wristband, while the buzz of the light beat at the back of my skull. Yannick's cell number had been rewritten in red pencil. Isolating. That one word kept moving in my head. It wasn't a transfer. It was a warning. They were pulling him out of sight, and when a prison does that, it is never for paperwork. A key turned somewhere down the corridor, then another, not close, just enough to remind me the hall was still alive. I stepped out of the utility room with the bucket in my hand and kept walking like a man sent to clean a spill. The floor under my boots was damp and slick with old wash water. The whole wing smelled of chlorine and hot pipes and the stale breath of men behind steel doors. At the corner, I saw the warden's office light flash once, then go dark. Through the narrow glass panel I caught movement, only a shoulder and a hand, but I knew that kind of motion. Men don't move like that unless they are being briefed or judged. The quartermaster was inside too, and there was a third shape beside him, slimmer, standing still. Somebody from outside, maybe. Somebody who didn't belong in the block but could still tell it what to do. That was the real sickness of the place, a chain of them. One hand on another hand, all of them wrapped around the same throat. I kept on toward the corridor sink and tipped the bucket as if I had forgotten to empty it. Water ran thin and gray into the drain, carrying a strip of paper pulp and one loose thread from the cloth. I watched it disappear and thought about the buried name in the ledger, the one I had already seen once and now could not forget. Larkin. Men like him never touch the grime, but they make sure somebody else does. The contraband phone buzzed again before I reached my bunk. One short vibration, then another. I waited until the guard at the end of the hall turned his head away and stepped into the shadow by the tool cage. The screen lit under my thumb. No number this time, just a message. You have 3 hours. South corridor after wreck. Bring nothing written. I read it twice. 3 hours meant one thing inside a prison. A movement window. A gap in the routine. A chance to get someone from one place to another before the block notices. If they were calling me to the south corridor, they were either giving me access to Yannick or setting me up to watch him disappear for good. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and went to the bunk with my face blank. The old man in the lower bed looked up once, saw my hands, and looked away. He understood enough to leave me alone. Good man, that. Old prison men know when to ask and when to shut up. I sat down, leaned forward, and pressed both palms against my knees until the shaking stopped. Then I took out the folded note one last time, flattened it against the mattress, and studied the red pencil mark. The line had been drawn too hard, too fast, almost angry. Whoever wrote it wanted me to know Yannick was being moved, but not by whom. And then I saw the second mark under the paper, so faint I had missed it before. A tiny symbol in the corner. 3 slashes and a dot. Same as the office file. I looked up toward the warden's wing, where the lights had gone out, and understood that somebody inside this place was using the same hand signs as somebody outside it. And they had just given me a clock. A decorated counter-smuggling officer, framed for his informant's murder, is buried inside a maximum security block the syndicate quietly controls. Playing the broken newcomer, he maps the cell boss hierarchy and the bought warden to engineer a reckoning that frees his caged kid brother. I spent the next hour learning what that clock meant. Not the one in the corridor, the one in the hands of whoever had written the note. The block had shifted into a different rhythm now. Keys moved faster, doors opened for shorter amounts of time. Men stopped talking in the open and started talking with their backs to the wall. From my bunk, I could see the far end of the wing through the crack in the door. The south corridor light was on, a weak yellow strip over damp concrete. Every few minutes, a guard crossed it with a folder tucked under one arm. Every time he passed, the same smell came with him. Cold wool, floor polish, and the metal tang of a fresh key ring. That smell always meant somebody important was being moved. I kept my face empty and waited until the count bell rattled through the block. Then I took my cup, walked to the water point, and stood in line like I had nothing better to think about than lukewarm tea. That was the cover, a boring man with a cup. Nobody searches a man like that twice. The old inmate ahead of me whispered once without looking back. "They're pulling somebody from the quiet wing." I didn't answer. I just lowered my eyes and watched the guard at the utility door. He had a red thread on his cuff. Not prison issue, contractor issue. That told me the office had brought someone in from outside again, and not for paperwork. I knew that symbol. 3 slashes and a dot. Same mark as the office file. Same mark on the note. The same hand, or somebody trained by it. When the line broke, I drifted with the others toward the side hall and let the noise carry me. The kitchen clatter came in from the left. Metal trays, a ladle scraping the bottom of a pot. Somewhere deeper in the block, a door slammed and a voice barked for silence. Nobody was silent, of course. Prisons never are. They just make different kinds of noise. The south corridor had one small service window above the skirting board, high enough that a man had to crouch to see through it. I took the chance when 2 guards crossed paths, and the line of bodies blocked the view. Through that little window, I saw a chair in the interview room, bolted to the floor. I saw a tape recorder on the table, black plastic, new batteries. And I saw Yannick through the open gap in the half-closed door. He was thinner than before. That hit me hard enough to make my teeth clench. His hair was flattened on one side, like somebody had shoved a hand through it too many times. He was standing between 2 men, wrists cuffed in front of him, shoulders pulled in. Not beaten senseless, worse than that. Still awake, still trying to understand where the blows were going to come from. I had to keep moving, because if I stopped, one of the guards would notice the way I was looking. So I lowered my head and walked past the window, as if I had only been checking the drain. But my mind had already mapped the room. Recorder on the table, chair bolted down, one camera in the corner, angle fixed on the chair, not the door. They wanted a clean picture. They wanted his words clean, too. Back in the line, my hand closed around the lip of my cup until the paper softened. A confession under a lamp. That was what they were building. The kind that sounds neat when it reaches a magistrate's desk. The kind that can bury a man without ever leaving fingerprints on the bruises. The phone buzzed once against my thigh. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. The message could wait. What I needed was a way to hear what happened in that room without getting myself dragged into it. A vent, a maintenance grill, anything thin enough to carry voices and ugly enough that nobody would think to seal it. Then the interview room door opened wider, and the man coming in behind the guards wore a dark coat over his prison shoes. Not a prisoner, not a guard. He carried a leather case in one hand and a pen in the other, and the warden himself stepped aside to let him through. The interrogator had arrived. He turned his head as he entered, just enough for me to see his mouth move before the door closed again. "Bring the brother in," he said. So I kept my head down and let the line move, because when a man like that says, "Bring the brother in," the room has already chosen the shape of the lie. The guards were suddenly busy in the corridor, all of them moving with that stiff, careful pace they use when somebody higher up is standing close. One key ring clinked twice, a door slammed farther down the wing. The air in the block turned sharp with disinfectant and wet concrete, and I could feel my own pulse ticking under the cuff of my sleeve. I stayed where I was, holding the cup that had gone cold, watching the south corridor through the same narrow gap in the wall where I had seen Janek before. That was all I needed, a sight line, a timing gap, one place where the noise of the block reached me before the block itself did. When the count shifted, I asked for the broom, because asking for work is safer than asking for nothing. The guard by the tool cage barely looked at me. He handed it over like he was throwing a rope to a man he expected to drown anyway. I took the broom, ducked my head, and drifted toward the maintenance side hall where the floor polish always left a sweet chemical smell that stuck in the throat. The warden's office was one door beyond that. The interview room sat behind a panel wall with a vent that never quite closed all the way. I'd noticed it days ago and filed it away with the other small weaknesses of the place. Men like me don't survive by noticing one big thing. We survive by collecting the little ones until they become a doorway. A guard stepped away from the office to answer his radio. That gave me 6, maybe 7 seconds. I leaned the broom against the wall, crouched like I was tying my boot, and slid the flat edge of my hand under the vent cover. The screws were loose enough to give. Not all the way, just enough. I widened the gap and pressed my ear to the metal. The room on the other side was close. Too close. I could hear a chair leg scrape the floor. I could hear paper being tapped against the table. And then I heard Janek breathe in. Not a sob, not yet. Just one rough, frightened intake of air. And that was worse. The interrogator's voice came through first, calm and almost friendly. The kind of calm that makes a man want to spit. He was speaking to Janek like they were two people comparing notes over tea, telling him he had two choices, telling him the system already had enough to bury him if he kept fighting, telling him his brother had left him no good options. He said my name once, slow and clear, and the way he said it made my mouth go dry. That was the moment I understood what they were doing. They were not trying to get a confession out of Janek. They were teaching him the words they wanted him to own. A clean little sentence. A neat enough lie to survive a magistrate's desk. I slid my contraband phone from the waistband of my trousers and felt the cheap plastic bite into my palm. The battery bar was low. Of course it was. Nothing useful in this place ever stayed full. I thumbed the recorder open and held the phone against the vent cover, just below the seam where the air still moved. The screen dimmed to almost nothing. Across the hall, the guard at the radio laughed at something I couldn't hear. I kept my face empty, my body loose, and listened to the sound of the room becoming evidence. The interrogator started coaching him line by line, not shouting. Worse. He had Janek repeat the same phrase 3 times, then changed one word and made him say it again. The first version blamed a shipment, the second blamed a contact, the third blamed me. Each time Janek's voice got thinner, as if the room was sanding him down from the inside. I watched the counter on the phone climb 1 second at a time and thought about the skim ledger, the buried names, the office mark with 3 slashes and a dot. It all sat together now. Same hand, same chain, same rotten pulse running from the block to the outside. Then the office door opened behind me. I shut the phone screen with my thumb and kept my ear to the vent, because if I turned too fast, the guard would see the screen glow. Heavy shoes crossed the floor behind me and stopped just short of my heel. A man cleared his throat. Not a guard, not the warden either. And from inside the interview room, Janik started to speak the first sentence they had put in his mouth. I stayed bent over that vent and let the room talk itself raw. Janik's first sentence came out thin and shaking. Then the interrogator cut across it with that same calm voice, tightening the line one word at a time. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. He was shaping the sentence like wet clay, pressing down on it until it looked clean enough for a file. I kept the contraband phone flat against the metal cover and listened to the tiny hiss of the air moving through the gap. The recorder icon on the screen blinked red. 12 minutes of battery left. 11, maybe, if the screen kept waking. Again, the man in the dark coat said, "Slower. You were closer the first time." Janik swallowed. I heard it. A dry little click in his throat. The response they wanted was already waiting in the room. I could tell from the way the interrogator breathed after each line. He would give Janik half a sentence, then let him finish it wrong, then correct him with the exact word he wanted. A rehearsal. The sort of thing that turns into truth once 3 other men sign it. I counted the sounds while I listened. 1 chair scrape, 2 paper taps, 3 slow footsteps pacing behind Janik. The warden never paced when he was sure of himself. That meant he was close enough to hear this personally, maybe standing just outside the frame with his hands folded, pretending he was only there for oversight. That was new. That meant the pressure had reached the room above the room. Then Janik's voice cracked on my name. Not loud, worse, almost careful. The interrogator let the silence stretch long enough to hurt, then started again in that same gentle tone. "Your brother arranged it. Say that clearly." I felt the words hit like cold water down the back of my neck. They were trying to pull me into the confession without ever naming me in the paperwork. If Janik said it cleanly, the whole thing would grow around my shadow. They could keep him alive just long enough to make the statement stick. That was the trick. Slow pressure. No blood on the floor. Just a man folding inward until he signs with his own voice. My thumb stayed on the recorder until the screen dimmed and I thought it might sleep. When I finally eased the phone away, the vent metal was damp under my palm. Sweat or breath, I couldn't tell. I took 1 step back into the shadow by the broom rack and looked at the hall. Empty, for the moment. That was enough. I slid the phone into my sleeve and waited until the guard at the end of the corridor turned to answer a radio burst. Then I crossed to the laundry cart with the same dead walk I used in the workshop, bent like a man with a bad back and no opinions. In the cart, under a wet towel smelling of detergent and rust, I hid the phone inside a folded sock. It looked ridiculous. That is usually how the best hiding places look. The ugly ones. The ones nobody respects. A minute later, I was back at the side wall, and the private number lit the screen before I'd even covered it with my hand. Send it. Nothing else. No greeting, no promise, just 2 words and a demand. I attached the audio file and watched the bar crawl for 6 slow seconds before it finally left my phone. While it went, I could hear Janik repeating a line again and again in the room beyond the wall, his voice already losing shape. The file transferred. The screen went black. Then, almost immediately, the reply came back. "Enough for magistrate review. Hold your position." Hold your position. Easy words. Harder here. I had just locked the phone in my sleeve when the office door opened behind me. Not a guard. The warden himself, coat collar up, face pale under the strip light. He did not look at the laundry cart. He looked at me. There was no surprise in his eyes now. only that flat, tired anger men get when they realize the thing under their control has started breathing on its own. He stopped 3 steps away and let the door swing shut behind him. "Where is the file you saw in the hallway?" he asked. I kept my face blank, the same stupid, harmless face I'd worn since day one. But the way he asked told me everything. They had found the gap, or thought they had. Someone had noticed the vent, or the cart, or the missing seconds in the corridor. The warden reached into his coat, and for one stupid second I thought he was going for a cigarette. Instead, his hand came out with a thin, black envelope, already open at one end, and he held it up just enough for me to see the red pencil mark on the corner. My mark. The one from Janik's paper. And from inside the interview room, Janik suddenly shouted, "No, wait!" I did not move when Janik shouted. That was the only way to stay alive in that second. A man in my place learns that panic is just another kind of signature, and signatures get filed. The warden held the black envelope with 2 fingers, like it had dirt on it. His eyes never left mine. Behind him, I could hear the interview room door open wider and the scrape of a chair being dragged back. Janik's breath had gone ragged. Not a scream now. Worse. The thin, broken sound of somebody trying not to give them the pleasure of seeing him crack. The envelope was open at one end, and the red pencil mark on it matched the one I had seen in the office file. That was enough to tell me they had not just found the track. They had followed it. The sidewall, the vent, the towel in the laundry cart. One of those steps had reached the wrong eyes. Maybe all of them had. "Where is it?" the warden asked again, quiet this time. I kept my face blank and looked past him, down the hall, where the strip light made a pale line over the floor. If I answered too fast, he'd know I was cornered. If I stayed silent too long, he'd know I was hiding something bigger than fear. So I did what the broken version of me would do. I swallowed once, hard enough to make the throat move, and let my hands tremble just a little at my sides. "I don't know what you mean, sir." It came out soft, badly, useful. The warden's jaw tightened. For one second I saw the man under the office coat, not the uniform. Tired, angry, backed into a narrow hall by people he had once thought were under him. He stepped closer, and I caught the smell of his aftershave trying to fight through sweat and stale paper. That smell always told me the same thing. A man had spent too long pretending he was calm. From the interview room, Janik said my name again, but this time it sounded wrong, flattened, like somebody had pressed the edges down with a thumb. Then the interrogator spoke, louder, clipped, all business now. "Take him back to holding. We're done here." That should have been a relief. It was not. It was the first clear proof that the room had lost patience. 2 guards moved past the doorway behind the warden, and one of them carried the leather case. The interrogator stepped into the hall at last, and I saw his face in full. Clean shave, dark coat, a thin line at the mouth that never looked like a smile. The type of man who can ruin a life and call it paperwork. His eyes flicked to me once, then to the envelope in the warden's hand. "Who touched the file?" he asked. Nobody answered. The silence went heavy enough to hear. I knew then that the file was not just about Janik. It was the connection, the thing that tied the block's paper trail to the outside hand. If they were asking that question out loud, it meant they were already worried the wrong person might have seen the wrong name. Larkin, maybe. Or someone above him. The warden finally tore his eyes off me and turned to the guards. "Move him." That was the first word I needed. I bent at once, as if the command had struck me in the knees, and reached for the dropped broom beside the wall. It was a stupid little motion, small enough to look useless. That is why it worked. My hand closed over the wooden handle, and I tipped the broom against the vent frame with just enough force to make the screws rattle. Not much. Just a sharp, dry clack in a corridor full of men already listening for trouble. Every head turned for half a second. Half a second is a knife if you know where to put it. I stepped backward, put the broom between me and the hall, and said, louder than before, "The cleaning cart's blocking the door." Nobody cared about the cart. They cared about the sound. One guard swore and moved first. Another looked toward the office. The warden barked something under his breath. Janik was half out of the room now, chained between two men, and I caught one look from him as they dragged him past the gap. Not hope, just the look of a man trying to memorize where the light was. Then my sleeve buzzed. The contraband phone. I did not reach for it, but I knew before I touched it that the message was going to change the shape of the next minute. That shout bought me one clean breath, and I used it the way I'd used every spare second in this place, by looking weak on purpose. I let my shoulders fold. I let the broom slip a little in my hand. When the warden turned toward the sound, I was already half bent over, a stupid, tired inmate with bad balance and no reason to be important. The guards surged into the hall with that heavy boot rhythm that makes a prison sound like a machine waking up. The interview room door stayed open just long enough for me to catch Janik's face as they dragged him out, pale, wet-eyed, still fighting the urge to look at me. The warden held the black envelope up near his chest and barked for someone to shut the corridor door. The interrogator stood behind him, coat open now, jaw tight, eyes moving too fast. He was no longer pretending this was routine. That was the first honest thing he had done all day. I tipped the broom against the baseboard, just enough to make the handle crack the metal rail. A small sound, nothing more. But in a corridor full of men already expecting trouble, it was enough. One guard spun toward me, another turned toward the office. The warden snapped, "Ignore him!" But the damage was already there. Everybody had to look somewhere, and while they looked, I watched the envelope slip out of his grip and hit the floor. It burst open on the tile. A transport order. Annex B, 1410, South Stair, medical van, 2 escorts. One signature I did not know, and one I did. Larkin. And under that, written in red pencil so hard the line nearly tore the paper, my own prison number. They were not just moving Janik, they were moving me with him. I stood up a fraction too fast, then caught myself and turned it into a wince, like my back had gone out. The warden saw it. He saw me read the page. His mouth pulled tight in a way that told me he was calculating whether to shoot first or lie later. The interrogator stepped in, bent once, and snatched the order off the floor. I saw the same mark again near the bottom, 3 slashes and a dot. The office hand, the outside hand, the same old dirty signal. My sleeve buzzed. I didn't dare look at the phone right away. I kept my eyes on the hallway and felt the screen heating against my forearm through the cloth. Then I got one corner of it under my thumb and read the message without moving my face. Do not let them separate you. That was all. No name, no explanation, just a knife of a sentence. I slid the phone back up my sleeve and finally let myself breathe through my nose. The air smelled of bleach, toner, and old concrete warmed by bodies. On the other side of the hall, the south stairlock clicked once, then again. A door down there had opened. Not wide, just enough to let in footsteps from below. The kind of footsteps that mean a transfer team is already in place. The warden pointed at Janik without looking away from me. Take him to Annex B, now. One guard hooked Janik by the arm. Janik stumbled once, caught himself, and then did the smartest thing he could have done in that moment. He looked at me exactly once and went blank. No pleading, no fear for them to feed on. Just a flat face, trying to remember where to put the next breath. He had learned that much already. I needed one of them to stay focused on me and one of them to forget me. So I dropped my broom. It hit the floor with a hollow clatter, and when I bent to pick it up, I let my hand brush the loose vent screw near the wall. The little metal lip moved under my fingers. Not enough to open, just enough to remind me it was still there. A thin root, a last small weakness in a thick system. The interrogator noticed the motion. He looked at my hand, then at the vent, then back at my face. His eyes narrowed. He had seen enough to know I was not afraid the way he wanted. That was the problem. A frightened man gives you noise. A patient man gives you work. "Search him," he said. The first guard stepped toward me. The second was already dragging Janek toward the south stair. Behind them, the intercom in the corridor crackled once, and a voice I did not know came through the speaker. Low, clipped, official. "External review team at the outer gate. 2 minutes." The warden's head snapped toward the speaker. For 1 second, nobody in that corridor was looking where they should have been. And in that 1 second, the lock on the south stair door clicked open again, from the inside. The south stair stayed open for less than a breath, and I used that breath to keep my face empty. The first thing through the door was not a guard with a gun. It was a man in a charcoal coat, no prison shoes, no chain on his wrist, carrying a slim gray case under one arm, like he belonged in a courthouse instead of this concrete tomb. 2 more came behind him, both in dark vests with hard badges clipped high on the chest. The warden took one look and lost color in his face. I saw it plain, calculation breaking. The leading man did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "By order of external review, all movement stops for 5 minutes. No transfers, no interviews, no removals." 5 minutes. In here, that was forever and nothing at all. The guards around me straightened so fast they looked painful. The interrogator's mouth tightened. One of the transport men at the stair door shifted his weight and kept his hand close to his belt, not on a weapon, but on a radio. I knew that posture. Men who expect things to go bad before the paperwork arrives. Janek was still in the corridor, half turned, held by 2 guards who had not yet decided whether to obey the warden or the new men. He looked thin enough to fold in the middle, but his eyes were open now. He had heard the word review. He knew that much, and for the first time in a long time, nobody in that hall had a clean plan. I bent and picked up the broom again. Small move, safe move, the sort of thing the broken version of me would do, while other people argued over authority. As I stood, I saw the gray case open just enough to show a stack of forms and a pen clipped to the inside lid. The top page had a heading from the ministry, and under that, a transport log with 3 names already typed in. One was Janek, one was mine. The third was the buried name I had found in the skim ledger, Larkin. That hit me harder than the rest, not because I had not suspected him, because now the paper had his name in the same place as ours, and names in a prison are never just names. They are roots, they are payments, they are who gets moved and who gets erased. The office had kept him on the outside, but the outside had already put him on our file. That meant the chain was longer than I thought, and tighter. The reviewer at the front turned slightly, and I caught the edge of his face. Older than me, clean-shaven, a scar through one eyebrow. Not a prison man, not a syndicate man either. The kind of face that belongs to somebody who has been standing between institutions long enough to know where the dirt hides. He looked past the warden, past the interrogator, and for 1 second, his eyes landed on me. No recognition, or maybe too much of it, hard to tell. "Warden," he said, and this time his voice had metal in it. "You will present the transfer records, the incident log, and the workshop inventory. Now." The warden swallowed once. He glanced at the interrogator, then at the guards holding Janek. He was deciding which lie would cost him least. That pause was all I needed. I stepped back against the wall and let my shoulders sag, letting the broom hang low in my hand. The room saw what it expected to see, a tired prisoner, frightened, irrelevant. Inside my sleeve, the contraband phone buzzed once. I did not open it. I didn't have to. The vibration told me the line was still alive, which meant somebody outside had seen the same papers and was waiting for the next move. Maybe the review team. Maybe the other side, maybe both. The problem with a rotten chain is you never know which link will snap first. The reviewer's assistant had already set a portable printer on the chair by the office door. I noticed the little roll of paper feeding through, white and clean and absurd in this hallway full of old concrete and rust. The man with the scar pointed at Jonik. "Bring him closer," he said. "I want to see the chain of custody." That phrase, chain of custody. Clean words, deadly words. The kind that can cut a man loose or hang him, depending who writes them down. The guards started moving Janik toward the center of the corridor, and the warden made one small mistake. He looked at me again, just once, as if he could still place the blame on the man in the gray uniform. That was the opening. Not for a fight, for a choice. I shifted my grip on the broom, set my feet, and watched the reviewer bend over the first page from the case. On the paper, beneath the ministry header, there was a second stamp I had not noticed before. 3 slashes and a dot. That was the breath I needed. Not because things were safe, nothing in that corridor was safe, but because the room had split open just enough for me to see where the pressure sat. The external reviewer did not look at the warden again. He had already decided the warden was the problem, or part of it, and men like that never waste a second confirmation. He stepped forward, took the paper from the printer tray, and flattened it against the chair arm. The page was still warm, black toner smell mixed with bleach and damp wool. He read the first line, then the second, and I watched his jaw tighten when he reached the transport code. Janik's name had been stamped twice, mine once. The third line was the buried name from the skim ledger, printed clean as if it had always belonged there. The warden tried to speak over him. "There's been interference," he said. "A prisoner has been tampering with office movement." That was his mistake. He pointed at me too early. The reviewer finally looked in my direction, and the look was not kind, but it was not surprised either. More like recognition of a shape he had already seen in a different room. "This one?" he asked, and before anyone could answer, he turned the page over and noticed the second stamp on the back, 3 slashes and a dot. I saw the exact moment the air changed. He had not expected that mark to show up in a ministry file, not that close to the transport order, not with the warden standing there sweating through his collar. He looked from the page to the warden, then to the interrogator, and the interrogator made the smallest move I had seen all day. He reached for the leather case at his side, not for a pen, for something thinner, a recorder maybe, or a phone. The reviewer stopped him with one hand. "Do not touch that case." No shouting, just that, and the whole corridor froze around it. I kept my broom low and took one slow step to the side, so I could see the south stair again. The door was still open, not all the way, just enough. A man in a dark uniform stood in the gap below, face hidden by the angle, holding the frame with one hand, as if he had opened it from inside and was waiting for permission to enter. Not a guard from my block, too clean for that, too still. He looked like someone who had come prepared to leave with papers, not bodies. That was new, and it told me the review team was only one layer. The reviewer saw him too. I knew it because his eyes moved, just once, to the stair opening before coming back to the warden. "Close that door," he said. The warden did not move. His mouth had gone thin. He was running out of lies, and he knew it. Behind him, Janik was still held in the corridor by 2 guards, but one of them had relaxed his grip half an inch. Enough for me to notice, enough to know the balance was slipping. Then the phone in my sleeve buzzed again. I did not look down. I didn't need the screen to know what it meant. Somebody had seen the page, seen the stamp, and decided the next part of the plan could not wait. I felt the vibration stop, then one more pulse, sharper this time. A call, not a text. The kind you answer if you want to know which side has chosen you. The reviewer folded the paper once and put it back on the tray. "Warden," he said, very quietly. You will produce the workshop inventory, the incident log, and the full movement list for the past 48 hours. If anything is missing, you are finished. 48 hours. I almost laughed at the neatness of it. In here, they always pretend the truth started recently, like the rot only grew overnight. The warden looked at me one last time, and in that look I saw something I had not expected. Not hatred, but relief. Not because he had won, because he had found the shape of a sacrifice. If he could pin this on the broken inmate, he might still keep the higher people calm long enough to survive the hour. He pointed at me and finally found his voice. "Search him," he said. "Now!" And as the first guard stepped toward me, the man in the dark uniform at the south stair came up one step into the light, and I saw the metal case in his hand, with my prison number typed on the label. Yannick. The external reviewer did not flinch when the case came up to his chest. He opened it with both hands, slow and exact, like he was unsealing a wound in a concrete tomb. Inside was not a weapon, not money, not some dramatic miracle. Just paper, a thin, handheld recorder, and a plastic sleeve with my prison number typed clean across the top. For 1 second, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the red pencil line under the number, 3 slashes and a dot. The warden saw it too. His face went gray around the mouth. The reviewer lifted the recorder, pressed one button, and Yannick's voice came out of the speaker, rough and thin. Not the whole thing, just the first line they had forced him to say. The interrogator made a sharp move toward the case, but the reviewer held up a hand without even looking at him. "Enough," he said. "I have what I need." Then he turned to the warden and asked, very calmly, "How long have you been coaching prisoners to confess?" Nobody answered. The corridor had gone so quiet I could hear the hum of the strip light above the office door. The guards holding Janek had gone stiff in the shoulders. One of them kept glancing at the south stair, where that dark uniformed man still stood with one boot on the step and one hand on the rail, patient as a judge. I kept my broom low and let my body look smaller than it was. That was the old trick. Be the man nobody wants to accuse out loud. The reviewer's assistant had already begun loading papers into the portable printer on the chair by the door. White sheets slid out one by one, warm and crisp, with movement logs, workshop inventory, and the 48-hour transfer list. Janek's name, mine, Larkin's, all on the same page now. That was the point of it, and it was uglier than any blade. The warden tried one more time. Those logs were altered. He had access. The reviewer cut him off. "You will not speak until I ask you to." I watched the warden swallow the rest of his courage. Men like him always run out of breath before they run out of lies. He glanced at the interrogator, and the interrogator gave him nothing back. That told me everything. The two of them had been useful to each other until the room changed shape. Now each one was calculating how fast the other could be sacrificed. Then the man on the stair finally moved. He came up one more step into the light and reached into the metal case with a gloved hand. He did not pull out a gun or a badge. He pulled out a sealed envelope, slim and white, with a second label taped on the back. My prison number again. Under it, in smaller print, was a word I had not seen before. Extraction. He held it up toward the reviewer. "Outer gate has 2 vehicles staged," he said. "Medical van and transport truck. Neither can leave until you sign. The office sent the first clearance 10 minutes ago." 10 minutes ago. So that was the game. While we stood in that corridor, somebody above the corridor had already tried to move the pieces. Somebody wanted my number attached to an extraction order, not a transfer. That meant they were not planning to keep me in the block. They were planning to pull me out of it, somewhere, somehow, before Janek could speak one clean sentence in front of a magistrate. The reviewer took the envelope, broke the seal, and read the page inside without changing expression. But I saw his eyes narrow when he reached the signature line. He handed it back to the assistant and looked straight at the dark uniformed man. "Whose office sent the clearance?" The man answered in a low voice. "Larkin's." That name landed like a metal tray dropped on tile. The warden jerked his head up so fast I thought his neck might snap. The interrogator actually stepped back. Larkin was not supposed to be here. Not on paper, not in the corridor, not in the same sentence as my prison number. The reviewer folded the extraction order once, then again. "Then you will hold the vehicles," he said. "Nobody leaves this block until I say so." And just as he said it, the paper printer behind him spat out one last sheet. The assistant looked down, then up, and his face changed. He turned the page toward the reviewer, and the new line at the bottom was not a transfer code. It was a time. 14:10. And under that, one word in red pencil. Now. That word, now, did more damage than a shout. The corridor seemed to hold its breath around it. The reviewer didn't raise his voice. He just lifted the printed sheet from the tray and tapped the bottom line with one finger, the way a man taps a table when he's already decided what it means. The page still smelled warm from the printer. Toner, hot plastic, damp paper. Around him, the office light hummed with that thin electrical whine that always gets inside my skull after too many nights in a block like this. The warden stared at the line for a second too long. I saw his throat move. He was trying to do the math fast, trying to find the version of the room where this could still be his. But the reviewer had already taken that away from him. "Who put the red mark on this?" he asked. No one answered. The interrogator had gone still beside the door, one hand hovering near his leather case like he had forgotten what he came here to protect. The dark uniformed man at the south stair had stepped up one more rung and now stood fully in the light. He was younger than the reviewer, older than the guards, and he carried himself like somebody who had spent years watching other men lie for a living. On the metal case under his arm, my prison number sat under a clear plastic label. Mine. Typed neat and cold, like a file heading. The warden finally found his voice. "That clearance came through my office." The reviewer looked at him without blinking. "No," he said. "It came through a dead link with a live signature. Try again." That hit the corridor hard. Even the guards holding Janek seemed to understand they were suddenly standing in the wrong story. One of them loosened his grip by mistake. Janek's shoulders pulled inward, but he didn't speak. He had learned enough by now to know that silence can keep you alive a little longer. I kept my hands loose around the broom and let the broken version of me show on my face. That was the costume, the tired inmate, the harmless one. It worked better when the room got crowded with authority, because authority always wants somebody soft to blame. I had seen that in ports, in warehouses, in border sheds. Same smell, different wall. The assistant at the printer slid another stack of paper into place. The machine spat out the transfer log, then a second page with the workshop inventory, then a third with the movement record from the last 48 hours. Each sheet came out clean and undeniable. One of the pages had the same 3 slashes and a dot at the bottom, stamped so hard it had bled through the paper. The reviewer took the top sheet, read 2 lines, and his mouth tightened. "Annex B," he said. 1410, medical van, transport truck, 2 escorts. He looked up. "Nobody is moving anyone until I get the keys to both vehicles." The dark uniformed man answered without hesitation. "The outer gate already has a hold order on it." That made the warden turn toward him, not with anger, with fear now. Real fear, the kind that reaches the eyes before the mouth knows what to do. The man on the stair opened the metal case and laid it flat against his thigh. Better than that. Clear plastic sleeves, a sealed radio log, and a fresh seal tag from the outer gate office. He held one of the tags up under the light. Larkin's office. The name came into the corridor like cold water. I felt it settle in my stomach. So the outside had already leaned in far enough to stamp the moving parts, and the prison only thought it was still in charge because the doors were still locked. That is how these places lie to themselves. They call it order right up until somebody with a cleaner signature takes the wheel. The warden took one step back. That was enough for the reviewer. "Search him," he said. One guard moved toward the warden. Another turned to me, because of course he did. I was the easy one, the small one. The man in the gray uniform with the broom. He reached for my chest pocket, and I let him, because what I needed was not strength. It was time. As his hand crossed my front, I tipped the broom just enough to catch the wheel of the printer stand. The whole thing shuddered, papers sliding sideways, and the assistant swore and grabbed for the stack. That tiny noise was all the corridor needed. Heads turned, eyes broke. Janek looked straight at me for one single second, and in that second I gave him the only signal I could, a slight shake of the head. Don't fight. Watch. Remember. The guard's fingers closed on my pocket and found nothing but dust and thread. He frowned. Too late. The reviewer had already seen the movement, and the dark uniformed man on the stair had already seen the guard's mistake. Then the case in his hand buzzed once. A phone. He looked down at it, and for the first time since he entered the corridor, his face changed. He turned the screen outward. On it was a single line of text, black on white. Medical van compromised. Do not open south gate. And beneath that, another line, added seconds later. Annex B at 1410. Bring the subject out, now. That word, now, hit the corridor like a nail driven into soft wood. The reviewer's assistant froze with the page half off the tray. The warden stared at the printer as if it had betrayed him personally. The strip light above the office door gave everything that sick, winter-white look that makes skin seem thinner than it is. I could smell hot toner, damp wool, and the sharp, clean bite of bleach from the corridor mop bucket. For 1 second, nobody moved, and in a prison that is as close to panic as you ever want to get. Then the reviewer lifted his head. "Hold the vehicles," he said. "Nobody touches the south gate." The man in the dark uniform at the stair didn't answer. He just looked down at the message on his phone, then up at the warden, and I saw the shape of the lie changing hands between them. The warden had gone pale right through the jaw, not because he had been caught, because he had been outrun by the paper. I kept my broom low and my shoulders loose, the same harmless stance I'd worn since the first day they buried me in this block. The broken newcomer, the man nobody important was supposed to notice. That mask only works if you never look hungry, so I looked tired instead. Tired gets ignored. Tired gets underestimated, and underestimated is the only reason I was still standing there while everyone around me started doing arithmetic with their fear. The reviewer pointed at the assistant. "Print the outer gatehold order again." The printer coughed out another sheet, then another, the rollers whining like an angry animal. I watched the fresh paper pile up on the chair and saw the same mark at the bottom of every page, 3 slashes and a dot. The warden had one like it stamped into his office file, the same dirty hand, the same route, only now it was all out in the open, where it could be read. Janek was still in the corridor, held by 2 guards who no longer knew which command to obey. One of them kept glancing at the reviewer's hands. The other kept looking at me, which made sense. I was the weak thing in the hall, the easy blame. If the room broke, they could always say the prisoner had caused it. That is what systems like this do. They turn a human being into a convenient cause and let the real rot walk free in a coat. The reviewer turned 1 page over and read the bottom line again. His face didn't change, but his voice did. "The medical van is compromised," he said. "Who put that text on my file?" Nobody answered him either. The dark uniformed man at the stair finally spoke. "Larkin's office sent a second clearance." The warden snapped his head around so fast I thought he might tear something in his neck. That name again, not whispered now, not buried under paper, out loud, in the hall, under the eyes of the external review. The assistant at the printer looked up with a paper still in his hand. Janek did too. I felt the room tilt a little, not because of the name itself, but because everybody in the corridor had heard it and knew what it meant. Somebody outside had already begun choosing who would be sacrificed. The reviewer held out one hand. "Give me the radio log." The man at the stair lifted the metal case, opened it, and passed over a clear sleeve with a folded log inside. I caught only a glimpse of the top line, but it was enough. "Outer gate, 1410, subject extraction." That was the language of the people who never get their own hands dirty. Clean words with blood behind them. I knew then that the next 10 seconds mattered more than the last 10 minutes. If they got me out of the corridor alone, Janik would vanish behind another door, and this whole thing would become one more missing person story with neat paperwork. If they kept Janik here, the outside would have to deal with a witness, not a number. So I moved. Not fast. Fast gets noticed. I let my broom slip, reached down for it, and used the bend to slide myself half a step closer to Janik's line without looking like I meant to. One guard saw the motion and started to reach for my shoulder. The reviewer saw him and barked, "Hands off the prisoner!" The guard froze, embarrassed, and in that tiny second, Janik's head turned just enough for our eyes to meet. No pleading, no panic, just the look of a man trying to memorize the exact shape of the room before it changes again. Then the phone in the dark uniformed man's hand lit up. He looked down, and his face changed in a way that told me whatever was on that screen did not belong to the warden, or the reviewer, or me. And from the south stair, the lock clicked open again, from the inside. What happened next was worse than that. It was paperwork with teeth. The reviewer didn't step back. He kept his eyes on the stairwell and said, "Nobody leaves until I've seen both vehicles." That single sentence pulled the whole corridor taut. The warden tried to answer, but the dark uniformed man at the stair lifted the sealed envelope with my number on it and cut him off. On the screen of his phone, a second message had already appeared, from outside. Annex B compromised. Hold the subject. I felt that word hit me like a shoulder in the ribs. Subject. That's what they call a man when they've reduced him to movement and risk. Janik was already being turned toward the south stair, and the guards still on him were looking at each other now, not the warden. Good. That meant the chain had started to fail. The reviewer took the page with the 1410 stamp and turned it over once. "This is your extraction order," he said to the warden, "and this one is your failure." He did not say it loud. He did not need to. The corridor heard him anyway. I kept my broom down and shifted one step toward the office wall. Tiny step. Safe step. The floor there was wet from the mop bucket, and the concrete under my boot had that cold, rough feel of old prison stone that never dries fully. The smell was bleach and hot toner, and the stale heat of too many men packed into one hall. On the stair landing, the dark uniformed man still stood with the case open, and now I could see the inside more clearly. Not guns, not cuffs. A radio log, a ministry seal tag, and a small black phone with a cracked corner. The kind of phone that only matters when someone on the outside needs a promise delivered quietly. The warden's voice came out thin. "That tag is not mine." The reviewer finally looked at him. "Everything in this block is not yours." That was the beginning of the break. Not a shout, not a burst of fists, just the wrong man being told the truth in front of too many witnesses. Janik was a meter from the stair now, one guard on each side. He was breathing hard, but he had stopped shaking. I could see it in the way he set his jaw. He had learned the first rule of cages. If you cannot run, stand still enough to be measured. The phone in the stairman's hand buzzed again. He looked down, then at the reviewer and said, "Outer gate just sent confirmation. The medical van is parked, engine on. They want clearance in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. I almost laughed. In here, 30 seconds can be a hallway, a sentence, a life. The reviewer didn't blink. "Then they can wait." The warden made a bad move then. He reached for the printer tray, not to grab paper, but to slam it down and break the line of sight between the reviewer and the stair. Too late. The dark uniformed man saw his hand go and stepped in. One fast move, shoulder first, driving the warden back into the office door hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The printer tray clattered to the floor. Sheets slid under boots. My number on one, Janik's on another, Larkin's buried name on the third. That name again. Same bloodless ink. Same dirty root. The interrogator moved at the same time, reaching for his leather case. The reviewer snapped, "Don't!" And, because the room had already chosen the side of the paper, the interrogator stopped. The first time all day he looked like a man who had run out of angle. I took another small step. The broom handle brushed the wall and made a dry scrape. Nobody looked at me. Good. I needed that. I was still the inmate, the weak one, the one with the stupid broom and the bad back. That shape kept me alive while the real machinery came apart around it. Janek turned his head. Just enough. "Tomas?" I shook my head once. "Don't speak. Don't give them more to file." The reviewer saw the exchange and his face changed a fraction. Not sympathy. Recognition. He knew now this was not just a prisoner trying to survive a transfer. It was a man holding a line so another man could make it to daylight. Men like the reviewer don't get moved by tears. They get moved by patterns, and he had finally seen the pattern. Then the south stair door banged open again from below. Not wide, just a hard push, metal on metal, enough to slam a gust of cold air up the stairwell and carry the smell of rain, exhaust, and outside dirt into the corridor. Somebody on the other side was coming up fast. The dark uniformed man turned his head, saw it, and his hand tightened on the black phone. He looked at the screen once, then at me, and his face told me, before he said a word, that the next message had my name on it. A decorated counter-smuggling officer, framed for his informant's murder, is buried inside a maximum security block the syndicate quietly controls. Playing the broken newcomer, he maps the cell boss hierarchy and the bought warden to engineer a reckoning that frees his caged kid brother. The south stair opened, and the man who came through it was just a damp folder and a set of brass keys that looked too clean for this block. He wore a maintenance coat with the cuffs darkened by rain, and his boots left wet marks on the concrete as he climbed. That alone told me he had come from outside in the last 10 minutes. Behind him, the stairwell breathed cold air up into the corridor, carrying mud, exhaust, and the smell of rain off the outer yard. He did not look at the warden first. He looked at the reviewer. "Outer gate is held," he said. "Medical vans parked 12 meters short. Drivers not in the cab." The reviewer held his hand out. The man gave him a folded strip of paper, then a second one from the inner pocket of the coat. On the top sheet was the gate log. On the second was a still from the camera over the south road. I saw the picture only from the corner of my eye, but it was enough. The van sitting crooked under the floodlight, the driver's door open, and on the windshield, a white tag with my number written in block letters. The reviewer read it once, and his face stayed flat, which was somehow worse than anger. "Who authorized this?" The maintenance man shook his head once. "Not the warden, not me. The seal came through a buried name in the skim ledger." He said it like he was naming a dead thing, and maybe that was what it was, a dead thing with authority. The warden took one step backward, a check, the kind a man makes when he is choosing whether to lie harder or run. The interrogator turned toward him at the same time, and for a second the corridor had all three of them looking at each other, like men who had just discovered the lock on the room was shared. I stayed where I was, broom in hand, gray coat hanging off me like it had been issued to the wrong body. That was the job, be the easy shape, be the one they think they can push aside while they settle the real problem. Janek had been eased closer to the reviewer now, not free, not safe, but no longer in the warden's grip. He was breathing through his nose, staring at the paper in the reviewer's hand, like it might turn into a door if he looked hard enough. Then the maintenance man looked at me, not at the warden, not at the reviewer, at me. "Your number is on the transport order," he said, "and there's a second order behind it." The reviewer turned the page over. There it was, the hidden line under the ministry heading, stamped so deep it had bled into the paper. 1410. Immediate. And under that one more thing in red pencil, pressed hard enough to tear the fiber. Do not let him leave the office wing. The warden made a sound then, small and ugly, from the back of his throat. He had seen it too. He knew exactly what that sentence meant, because the office wing was not a place you mention unless you were trying to move someone quietly, or kill them quietly. The corridor went still around it. Even the guards stopped shifting their boots. The maintenance man lowered his voice. The driver at the gate is restrained. Larkin's office sent the amended clearance, but the first signature is already dead. Somebody else is pushing paper through the same channel. That was the first time I felt the old chill under my ribs since the whole thing started. Not fear, recognition. A trap inside a trap. A clean route where a clean route should not exist. The sort of thing built by men who never touch a door handle and still know where the body will land. I let the broom slide a little in my hand and asked, very softly, "Where is Larkin?" The maintenance man didn't answer right away. He only glanced toward the office wing, where the light under the door had just gone thin and yellow, like somebody inside had reached over it with a hand. Then he said, "If the forged order came from anywhere in this block, it came from there." And the office door at the end of the corridor clicked once from the inside. The south stair opened from inside, and for one hard second, I thought the block had finally decided to swallow us whole. Then the man on the other side stepped into the corridor with a ministry seal in one hand and rein still clinging to his coat, and I understood the door had not been opened by accident. Somebody outside had pushed the last piece into place. "Hold," the reviewer said, and the words sat over the hall like a metal bar. Nobody moved, not the warden, not the interrogator, not the guards holding Janik. The only sound was the printer chewing paper in the office wing and the low hiss of wet boots on concrete. The maintenance man from the stair handed over his phone, and the screen glowed with one line that made my ribs go cold. Annex B, compromised. Do not let the subject leave the office wing. I had been a subject in their files for years. In that corridor, it finally sounded ugly enough to be true. The reviewer took the phone, glanced at the message, then looked at the warden with the same calm face a man uses on a broken machine. "You are done talking," he said. "The transfer log, the gate record, the workshop inventory, and the audio file all match, and your buried name is on every page." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The warden's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The interrogator started for his leather case, and the reviewer's hand shot out. "Touch that, and I will have you arrested where you stand." That was the first real end to the lie. The corridor felt it. Janik did too. He stopped fighting the guard's grip and turned his face toward me, pale and wet-eyed, but steady enough to listen. I lifted the broom and set the handle against my hip like I had all the time in the world. That was all the room needed to decide I was harmless. The easy man, the one you lean away from when the real trouble starts. So I let them keep thinking it. I stepped once, just enough to block the warden's line to the stair, and he reacted exactly as I hoped. He lunged for the printer tray, trying to smash the paper before anyone could read the names again. He was already too late. The dark uniformed man from the stair crossed the corridor in 2 strides and hit him shoulder first. The warden's head snapped off the office door hard enough to leave a red print in the paint. He folded, grabbed the frame, and tried to stand. He did not get the chance. The reviewer's assistant had already printed the second set of logs, and the top sheet showed what the first one had not: the medical van route, the outer gate hold, and a clean note in black ink that read, "Subject extraction canceled." I almost felt sorry for the warden then. Almost. Not because he had earned mercy, because men like him always discover, too late, that paper cuts deeper than fists. The interrogator went white. The maintenance man moved to the printer and pulled the recorder from the case, thumb already on playback. Janik's voice came out through the speaker again, thin but clear this time, and right after it, the interrogator's calm instructions. Not a confession, a coached lie. The room heard the difference. So did Janik. He shut his eyes once, then opened them and said, louder than I had heard him speak in months, "That's not mine." He told me to say it. Nobody interrupted him. The reviewer nodded once, and that was the only signal the corridor needed. The guards let go of Janik. The dark uniformed man took the warden's arm and turned it behind his back. The interrogator tried to step away, but another pair of hands had already appeared at the south stair. The outside had more of a hold on the block than the block knew. That was the joke at the center of all this. The prison had been wearing a chain and calling it a belt. By the time the reviewer signed the last page, my prison number had been crossed off the transport order and replaced with witness protection paperwork. Temporary suspension of sentence, immediate removal from the block. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired enough to sleep standing up. But when Janik was brought past me toward the stair, he stopped just once and pressed his fingers against the rail, as if he needed the metal to tell him he was real. I put my hand on the inside of the rail, 1 second, no more, and he saw it. That was enough. The rain outside had washed a clean strip down the concrete at the stair mouth, but the dark line where the medical van had stood was still there, a wet rectangle nobody could scrub away before dawn. That was the whole lesson, if you needed one. The block could forge papers, coach confessions, and bury names in logs, but it could not make the road forget the weight of a vehicle that had waited too long. The printer kept humming after everyone left, feeding blank pages onto the tray. In the office window, the strip light flickered over the empty chair. If this kind of prison story keeps you leaning in, subscribe and leave me a comment with the one detail that stayed with you most.